Welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. My guest today is Erica Kasraie, who's a human rights activist from Iran. Actually, she's now based in Washington, D.C. And together with her, today we'll talk about revolts in Iran. Thanks for joining me today, Erica. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, before we start, would you like to give some background about yourself to my viewers so that we can know who you are, something more about you?
Sure. So I'm Iranian, and I was born in Iran around the time of the Islamic Revolution. And my family fled Iran shortly after the revolution. We fled to Italy, actually. We lived in Italy for a year, and then we came to the United States. And I've spent most of my political career, most of my professional career working on Iran policy and human rights issues and the issue of religious freedom in the Middle East.
Okay, I would like to start talking about something very recent. Like the Western media last few days reported that the Iranian government announced that they are disbanding the morality police, and that also the law that requires women to wear their hijab is being reviewed. But that sounds mostly like propaganda. Probably that's not true. They just want to show that they're actually doing something. So can you help us understand what is actually going on?
Yes, actually, thank you for asking that question, because it seems like most journalists don't know how to do their job anymore. That's actually fake news. The Attorney General of Iran made a statement, and his exact words are the following: morality police has no connection with the judiciary and was shut down by the same place that it had been launched from in the past. So the Western media took this statement and characterized it as a signal to shut down the morality police, which is absolutely false. The reason we haven't seen morality police during these last 3 months of demonstrations is because the anti-riot police have been serving as the morality police, cracking down on protesters. And unfortunately, the news kind of spread very fast. And you were right, it's absolutely propaganda, because it came on the eve of nationwide strikes that were organized by protesters inside the country. The industries, the truck industry, teachers, and all of the oil industry took a 3-day strike this past Monday, yesterday, and today, Wednesday. And it would commence today, which is Student Day, in front of Azadi Square, where protests would commence. But to your point, no, the morality police have not been abolished.
Well, the Western media is also covering mostly Tehran, but I think that revolts are spread in all the countries. So can you help us understand how widespread are these protests in the country?
Well, in the beginning, when Mahsa Amini first was murdered by the morality police, the protests began in the Kurdish region of Saqqez, where she was born and where her family is from. And it started to spread all the way north and east and west in over 150 different cities. The regime has cracked down brutally on protesters. I'm sure you know, but they have arrested 15,000 people. Over 400 people have been killed, and 60 children among those that have been murdered. So the protests have evolved into different types of protests. You maybe don't see them in the streets. It's mostly on university campuses, or some type of civil disobedience, where you see pictures of Khamenei being burned, pictures of Qasem Soleimani that are burned, statues that have been desecrated. I've even seen some really interesting types of artistic expressions of protest, where students will take red paint and pour it into fountains as a symbol of the blood that's being spilled. Artists and poets are making different types of, songs and films. I mean, we have one filmmaker who was arrested for just making a short silent video. There was not even words, but the expression of his support for the protests caused the regime to arrest him.
And also protests are also now spreading to other countries where there are Iranian communities. For instance, I saw Rome, London, Washington.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question.
No, you answered the right question, and now I'm asking another one.
Outside of the country, yeah. So,
yes.
It's interesting. Over the course of my career, I have never seen so much unity among the Iranian diaspora worldwide. Immediately this one hashtag Masa Amini became our rally cry. And eventually, the theme of this movement is woman, life, freedom, which is a Kurdish slogan from a song. And, I can't believe it, but there have been protests in 150 cities around the world in solidarity with Iranians inside Iran. A victim of, a gentleman by the name of Hamid Ismailian, whose wife and daughter were murdered in the downing of the Ukrainian airliner by the regime, really initiated these protests. And he lives in Canada, and he was able to organize a protest in Berlin where 100,000 people came in solidarity. So in Washington, D.C., where I am, the organizers of these demonstrations have been out there every Saturday since these protests began. So just to see the solidarity among Iranians across the world has been a very beautiful thing for me as an Iranian.
One thing that the Iranian government is doing is cutting down internet connections so that people cannot access either Western media or know things from outside. So what I'm wondering here is, how come the government is so scared by freedom of information? And also, how aware are people in Iran about ways around it, such as the Tor browser, VPNs, or things to avoid these kind of controls?
Yes, the dictator is always scared, when he turns the internet down. That's a really good signal for the world. He's afraid of information getting out. In Iran, we don't have media. We don't have free media. So the cell phone is the only way that Iranians can get information out to the world. And I have to tell you, this generation is very clever and very smart and very brave. This is the Gen Z generation, and they have had access to various social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok that not only have given them a window to the outside world, but also it's a way for them to get the information to the world. And so, in fact, in the past, we've had Chinese hackers give VPNs to Iranians, activists. And right now, the Iranian diaspora, we are buying VPNs and giving them access so that they can bypass government filters. I know that Starlink has also been operating inside Iran. It's been operating since Elon Musk asked for a bypass to the sanctions. And so, they're using every possible mechanism to bypass the internet shutting down, slowing down, and the filtering of various websites like Twitter, and the access that they have has really come from those bypasses.
So you said that there's no free media in Iran, meaning that the government is pushing its own propaganda.
Correct.
So what kind of narrative are they now pushing in order to stop the revolts or to jeopardize them?
Well, I mean, it's just for example, this Western media, right? How it all of a sudden ran this story about, they're going to loosen up the the hijab laws, maybe not. It's like almost like, well, maybe the revolts will stop. Maybe the protests will stop if the people think that we're going to stop cracking down on hijab. They obviously use, unfortunately, recently we had a very famous rapper by the name of Tumaj Salehi who was arrested. They will broadcast his interrogation, just a few minutes of it, where they're torturing him or where they're making him have false confessions as a way to scare people on state TV. You know, this is another way that the regime tries to inject fear, and it's always by fear. It's always using some type of fear to make people stop coming to the streets. But it's not working. And that's, you know, that's the interesting point about what's happening right now, is that the people aren't scared anymore. You know, the reason we've had so many people die is because, you know, this generation doesn't want to live under this regime anymore, and they're willing to die for freedom.
Well, yes, this is exactly what we also see on the news, because they're not scared anymore. I mean, they want this government to go.
That's right.
So let me ask you something more general. In many Islamic countries, ladies are not required to cover their hair. So is wearing a hijab foreseen by Islam, or isn't it?
Well, I don't want to speak for all of Islam,
Okay.
but, you know, we have just a few Islamic states where the country's laws are Sharia law. And according to Sharia law, women have to cover, and they have to cover. You cannot see their hair. I mean, even in some countries, you cannot see their hands, because God forbid your hands, you know, make a man's eyes look at you inappropriately. But, you know, for example, I've traveled to Turkey, and Turkey is a secular country. You have the right, you can choose to cover or not cover. But countries that are governed by Islamic law, yes, women have to cover. There's no choice there. Woman is half of a, you know, has the half of the right of a man. She doesn't have the right to divorce. She doesn't have the right to travel without the permission of her father, her husband, or her brother. Woman doesn't have the right to have her children if she is divorced. The father gets the children. If she is assaulted or raped, if there were not two witnesses to see her having been raped, then it's her fault, according to Islamic law. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you did. You did very well. I mean, it's a very different world, so there cannot be just a single answer. It depends on what kind of law the state is enforcing it.
Well, if you recall, when ISIS invaded northern Iraq, they wanted to instate a real Islamic state.
Yeah.
And a real Islamic state would make all women just disappear, really, when you think about it. I mean, look at Afghanistan now. Now the Taliban have enforced that women can't even not have education. I mean, think about it. In this day and age, in today's day and age, girls cannot go to school. Afghanistan is the only country in the entire world where girls are forbidden from being educated. This is absurd. And to me, the international community just sits by and lets this happen. You know, when ISIS invaded northern Iraq, you know, a woman couldn't even be outside. She cannot even be seen. And when she is seen, she is to be totally covered. And the only thing that you can see are her eyes.
Well, I was actually just going to ask you, how would you describe the condition of women in Iran, even before these revolts? Like, is it as bad as Afghanistan? Is it any better? Is it bad enough?
Look, obviously, the situation in Iran is much different than Afghanistan. Girls and women in Iran are educated, are highly educated. It's very different. Afghanistan, there's a lot of illiteracy. Girls, even before Taliban, would only go to school until 6th grade, just to get the basics. You know, over the course of the last, I would say, you know, during the last 15 to 20 years, you know, Iranian women have really pushed far and have tested the Islamic laws. You know, in the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, nail polish was forbidden, makeup was forbidden, but women pushed those lines. And today women can wear makeup and, you know, polish their, nails and be in public. But that's exactly why the morality police was put in place, because they want to make sure that they're not pushing the lines too much, right? And obviously, showing your toes is forbidden. Not wearing socks is forbidden. But in terms of women in Iran, I think it's obviously very different than Afghanistan. Iranians have been rejecting Islam because of the Islamic Revolution, because of the way that the regime has invaded every area of Iranians' lives. I mean, Islamic law is in every private part of your life. It's in school, it's in work, it's in your home life. And Iranians are rejecting it, which is very different than the surrounding countries. I think, especially in the Arab world. In the Arab world, I don't think although I should say that I've been to Jordan, and Jordan's a very secular country, but even among the young Muslim, community, they don't want to hear the call to prayer. It's like very invasive, right? You're going about your life and you hear the call to prayer. I remember being on a movie set working with young Arabs, and every time we would hear the call to prayer, someone would say, it's like they're just tired of it. It's like being pushed on them every day, every part of their life. And, religion is a private matter. It's between you and God. And until the Arab world and the Islamic world realize that it should be a private matter, I don't know if there will be any progress.
Well, funny thing is that we see images from Iran in the 70s, which was a very modern and Western country. So what happened next, and how can a country plunge back like that?
Yes, it's interesting. I have so very few memories of Iran when I was a child, but those are the very memories that I have is, going to the beach with my family. And I don't remember anyone covering, but can you imagine? You go to the beach as a woman in Iran and you have to go into the water fully covered. Isn't this absurd? I remember going to school without hijab, going to the schoolyard and doing exercises. And then the next day, I'm given this cloth to put on my head as a 6-year-old. How can a 6-year-old arouse a man? How can the hair of a child arouse a man? It just doesn't make sense to me as an adult. But as a child, I put this thing on my head and I thought it was kind of like, oh, it's a novelty, Christians, Jews, Muslims lived together in harmony in Iran before the revolution. And unfortunately, because of an ideology, and for some reason during those times, that ideology made sense to some enough that it would plunge the country back to the dark ages, as far as I'm concerned, this barbaric kind of ideology that takes the rights of a woman away is strange to me. I have pictures of my mom and her family. Excuse me.
No problem. Okay, feel free to continue your sentence, Erica.
So yeah, I mean, it's really unfortunate what's happened to Iran. Prior to the revolution, women were very progressive and all the religions lived together in harmony. There was no persecution of minority groups. And unfortunately, because of an evil ideology, the country plunged into this barbaric, backwards, dark ages.
And what can be the outcome of these revolts? What I mean here is, can this government outlive the revolts? Are reforms enough? Or do the population really want them to go?
Well, reform has been tried many times. There have been many demonstrations, anti-government demonstrations over the course of the last 15, 20 years. And I think at this point, the regime was going to try everything it's possibly capable of to crack down. But as far as I can see, this generation wants this regime gone, and they will do whatever it takes. I think what will crack the regime is when the oil industry goes on strike, when people within the regime start defecting. Right now we've seen many celebrities, various high-profile figures within the the social classes come out and stand with regime change, stand with the demonstrations, stand with the people. And it will take time. The Islamic Revolution didn't happen overnight. It took about a year. And revolutions are not easy, but this is definitely a revolution. And I believe that the Iranian people will definitely be successful.
Wow, that's quite a statement. And can this be a sort of Arab Spring for Iran that also spreads to adjacent countries?
I certainly hope so. I don't have a crystal ball, but I know that, during the time when women were in the street, cutting their hair, burning their hijab, women in Iraq were doing the same thing in solidarity. Kurdish women were coming to the streets and chanting woman, life, freedom. I hope to see Afghanistan. I hope to see that the women of Afghanistan will rise up, because honestly, at this point, the women of Afghanistan really have the hardest life in the region. They have zero rights. Can you imagine? You cannot even go to school. I mean, I don't think this type of ideology will last, especially not in the modern world, where we have an opportunity to connect with so many people through the power of social media, through the power of media. And the more educated women are, the more educated the society is. I just don't think these ideologies will last.
And what can be an international outcome of this, meaning in long terms? Because Iran is not in good terms with the West, but also for doing things such as providing drones to Russia or things of the sort. If this government falls, probably Iran can have a better relationship with Europe and North America. What do you think?
Well, Iran has not had good relations with the United States because Iran is a bad actor. Iran is the #1 terrorist funder in the world. Iran causes havoc in the Middle East. The Islamic Revolution happened because this ideology that Islam should be exported across the world. Okay, they really believe this. You have to take them for their word. And the reason why there's an Islamic Revolutionary Guard is because there is a force, there is a military force that wants to export this ideology, and it is exporting it. It exported it, into Syria. It's exporting it into Latin America. It wants to expand Islamic ideology. And Islamic ideology, according to the Shia, which is what Iran is, it's a Shia state, they believe that their 12th Imam Mahdi will come back only when Islam has been glorified. Everyone on the planet will be Muslim, and the Christian and the Jews will be eliminated. And so when they say we want to wipe Israel off the map, they really mean it. Take them for their word. And so this is why the United States is in conflict with this ideology, because it is in complete contradiction to liberty and freedom and the rule of law. As far as, countries that do business with Iran, like Europe, like Germany, I think it's time for the international community to make a moral decision to cut its ties with the Islamic Republic. And the demands of the protesters, the demands of the Iranian people, is as follows. Stop the nuclear negotiations. That's number one. Stop those conversations. There's no negotiating. Iran does not need nuclear capability. We have enough natural resources for energy, but the regime has depleted the country of its natural resources. They want the Europeans and those that are friends with the Islamic Republic to send their diplomats home, shut down their embassies, stop doing business, no more economic, no more economic negotiations or deals. And finally, I think those world leaders who are shaking hands with the Islamic Republic have their conscience to live with. Will you continue shaking hands with a murderous regime that,
of course not,
kills its people, exports terror, and threatens the stability of the Middle East? Do you want the blood of those children on your hands? That's the decision the world leaders need to make.
And what should the West do as far as supporting the revolts, in your opinion? Should the West intervene? Because on one side, I think they should. On the other side, I think that can escalate things and make it even worse. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I've just pointed out what needs to happen. Intervening means do not empower the regime by negotiating with them. Isolate that regime. I was recently in Germany. I was addressing the German parliament and expressing the wants and the desires of the Iranian people. What is it that the Iranian people want? The Iranian people want Germany, Italy, France, and so on to stop negotiating with this regime. That's what they want. And, I made a comment about, I was in a closed door meeting with some members of parliament, and I pointed out these isolation mechanisms that the world leaders can take. And he says, I said, if let me ask you a question. If you had a murderer running around your streets and he came and knocked on your door, would you let him in your home? And he made this, we don't take the US Trump approach to diplomacy. We believe in talking to people. And I said, yes, of course. When you're talking about normal people, you don't let a murderer come into your house and make an embassy in your home, have a press house in your home. You send them back, you leave them out because you don't want to deal with them. And so that is what the West can do, is stop shaking hands with this murderous regime that tortures its own people. It kills children. I mean, right now we have evidence to prove that the regime is raping boys and girls that have been arrested as a form of punishment and putting fear into people not to come out and to protest. You want to shake hands with those people, the blood of the Iranian people will be on your hands. And the Iranian people won't forget who stood with them during this time. They're going to come, there will become a time when these very people will come to power and they'll remember who stood with them.
Well, Erica, many thanks for your time and for your very precious explanations. I think that you gave everybody a very good insight about what actually is going on in Iran and what are the ways to stand by Iranian people. So thanks again for joining me today.
Thank you so much for continuing to bring the story about the revolution in Iran to the media. I think it's really important. And if your listeners want to help in some way, continue to use the hashtag Mahsa Amini as a way of keeping the story in the news. Thank you so much.
Definitely will. Thanks everybody for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.